to keep the crazy pace of this up and to keep you stimulated for your next couple of days here, I'm going to move to yet another topic here, but I think this is really important. This is talking about this next generation in America. An amazing generation, a very amazing generation, the millennial generation. Think of them essentially as the folks in their 20s and teens, and a lot of you might even have kids at that age. First of all, they're the biggest generation in American history, bigger than the baby boomers. And this is the way, if you think about it here, this is what essentially demographers use this way. This is called an age pyramid, or used to be called an age pyramid, where essentially men are the blue and women are the red, and you start with little kids, 0 to 4 on the bottom, and you get old people at the top. And the reason they were pyramids is societies used to be very orderly about this. You'd have a lot of babies, and people would die off in very ordered fashion, and you'd have like 5 old people at the very top, right? That was until the baby boomers came around and said, no way. The boomers are essentially stretching that. Oh, plus medical advances and all the different health kind of things that have happened. And so what's happened now is the population of America in 2015, which is very close here, 5 years out, essentially you're going to have all boomers will be 50 or older, and now push it up to 70. But the key thing is this bulge. That is the millennial generation. In some respects, it is the kids of the boomers, but it's also immigrants, because there's been a huge surge of immigrants, and we're going to lay out that in a second here too. This generation is essentially where the boomers were like in the early 70s. And think about how many ways American society changed through the boomers, going through every life stage. This is really what's happening to this generation. And as a business, they're your employees, they're your consumers, they're buying their first homes, their cars. They are the people you have to basically totally get. And by that time, they'll all be adults, 18 and over. So right now, they're basically that age. Technically, they are 31, the front lip. There's a little debate on where you start or end, so that's it. They also, this has a little bit, that's 50 million of them were eligible to vote, which is one of the reasons they were like behind this Obama thing. And we won't go into the politics of it, but in fact, there's more of them every year, and so there's a lot of kind of interest in like what is the impact politically of these folks over time. But also, it's part of a global boom. Half the planet now is under age 30, and actually the median age is falling. So you think about going global, you got to deal with a young future. The world are there millennials. That's the world right now, or going to be. Now, everyone thinks, well, young people, I know what young people was. I was a young person. Not true. Every young generation has its own personality. This is a Time magazine cover for the Gen X, which I'm sure there's a lot of Gen X people here. They had one kind of, more brooding kind of, look at the black leather thing. And this is a Newsweek cover a couple years ago. This is the millennials. Hugging, boys and girls, colorful, very different vibe. And that's just kind of a fun way to play with it. But there's a lot of things about this generation that are different. And I'll just mention 5 because we don't have enough time. I do a whole talk on just this millennial generation, frankly. For one, they are the most diverse generation in American history. 40% of them are from minority groups. It's something, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second here. They're the most endowed, educational levels, without question, more educated, more resources, more things went into this generation of kids than any other previous generation, even though we wring our hands about education and stuff, higher education levels. They are the most global by far. 20%, I was talking about this at my lunch table, 20% of all college kids now go abroad for a significant chunk of either year abroad, semester abroad, or summer abroad. 20%. When I was a kid, it's like barely anybody went, Huge kind of exposure. And some of the elite colleges, it's more like 50 and 60% of these kids are doing it. Just expected you go abroad. They're extremely civic-minded. They're really can-do kind of folks. This is partly why they got all involved in politics and Obama and all that stuff. Very optimistic crew. This is a really different generation. It's one that you got to wrap your head around differently. The other thing is they're born into this new world of this new tools. These are the workers that get this new media and get some of the technology implications. I'm going to give it to you in a second here. Now, the other thing I mentioned to you was it's the most diverse generation in American history. This is happening across the whole country, but because immigrants are normally younger, it's reflected in this generation. But these trends you should also know. Any business in the United States has got to really think through the implications of this. This is essentially the United States population from 1980 to 2050, mid-century. These are based on Census Bureau numbers. This is just basic, normal immigration. This isn't illegal immigration or anything like that. And this is basically, the bottom line here is the Latino population played out till 1950. And essentially by 2050, 30% of the country will be Hispanic origins. Just like if this would have been, same thing would have happened in the 20th century, you would have said, oh, the immigration, the Italians and the Irish in the early part of the late 19th century and the early 20th century played out to by the middle of the century. John F. Kennedy was president, Frank Sinatra was the heartthrob. That kind of thing is happening to essentially Latino culture and Latino kind of roots essentially in this country, or in many ways there's a lot of parallels. But anyhow, you got to wrap your head around that. Now the flip side is, it's not just Latin America. Essentially, in 1960, actually 64, we made a very conscious decision to change our immigration law away from preferring Europeans to essentially opening to the rest of the world. And so what happens from that point on essentially is the growth here. This is the percentage of the population of minorities, the bottom one going up, and the top one, is, since it's a percentage, is the white population coming down. Now, so right today, that's where the United States stands in terms of its basic kind of balance of white to minority population. This is the projection, again, based on Census Bureau understanding, that essentially where the United States will be. Basically, it'll be there in 2050. That is where California is right now, essentially. And I think Texas is close to that. So it's not really that different in some respects. You can see it happening in different states. But essentially that's, now anyone doing business in the United States has to also understand that dynamic going on here. Now the final thing here is, this is the current situation in the United States. Already you can see the percentages of folks, even in these border states, well over 30% of the population's Latino, and also into the heartland.